I asked my daughter-in-law what time to arrive for Thanksgiving. She smiled and said, "There's no seat for you. This year is just for real family." 2 days later, her name disappeared from every account, and my son had no idea what was coming. The morning started like any other Thanksgiving for the past 15 years. I woke up at 5:30, my internal clock refusing to let me sleep in even on holidays. The kitchen felt colder than usual as I padded across the linoleum floor in my slippers, reaching for my favorite apron, the one with tiny turkeys that Emma had picked out for me at a craft fair 3 years ago. I'd spent 2 days preparing for today. The pumpkin pie recipe I'd perfected over decades sat in my recipe box, handwritten on a card so old the edges had yellowed. It was David's absolute favorite, something he'd requested every Thanksgiving since he was 8 years old.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
I could still picture him as a little boy, sneaking into the kitchen to scrape the mixing bowl clean, getting cinnamon all over his school clothes. As the pie baked, filling my small apartment with the warm scents of nutmeg and vanilla, I laid out my clothes for the day. The navy cardigan David had given me for Christmas last year, a simple white blouse, and my best pair of slacks. Nothing fancy, but I wanted to look presentable. Ashley always looked so put together, and I'd learned over the years that first impressions mattered to her. I thought about calling to confirm the time again, but decided against it. We'd already had that conversation yesterday. "Come around 2, Ashley had said, her voice distracted as usual when she spoke to me. "We'll probably eat around 3:30. Standard timing, the same as always. The drive to David's house took 20 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively more expensive. I remembered when he'd first told me about buying the house in Maplewood Estates. Ashley had fallen in love with the gourmet kitchen and the 3-car garage. At the time, I'd worried about whether they could afford the mortgage on David's salary alone, but he'd assured me his business was doing well enough to handle it. Standing on their pristine front porch, I noticed Ashley had already put up Christmas decorations. Elegant wreaths with gold ribbons hung on each window, and tiny white lights outlined the roofline. Everything perfectly coordinated, just like Ashley preferred. I could hear sounds from inside, laughter, music, the clatter of dishes being arranged. I rang the doorbell and waited, adjusting my grip on the pie carrier. Through the frosted glass panel beside the door, I could make out movement and voices. Multiple voices. It sounded like quite a gathering already. Ashley opened the door, and immediately I knew something was wrong. She wasn't wearing the warm hostess smile she usually put on for family gatherings. Instead, her expression was carefully neutral, almost businesslike. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless despite the fact that she'd presumably been cooking all morning. She wore a burgundy cashmere sweater that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 2 months. "Oh, Hannah," she said, and there was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. "I thought David told you." "Told me what, honey?" I asked, though I was already feeling that familiar anxiety that came whenever Ashley looked at me like I'd done something wrong. Ashley stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. The sounds from inside became muffled, but I could still hear them, distinctly more than just David and the children. She lowered her voice to that particular whisper she used when she wanted to seem considerate while delivering bad news. "We decided to keep Thanksgiving small this year. Just immediate family. You understand, right?" The words hit me like a physical blow. Immediate family? Ashley, I'm David's mother. I'm Emma and Jake's grandmother. She sighed. The kind of long-suffering sigh she used when she thought I was being difficult. "Of course you are, Hannah. But this year we really wanted to focus on our nuclear family unit. David's been so stressed with work lately, and the kids have been acting out at school. We thought a quieter, more intimate celebration would be better for everyone involved." Through the window beside us, I caught a glimpse of the dining room. The mahogany table David had inherited from his father was set with Ashley's good china, the Lenox pattern she'd registered for at their wedding. I counted the place settings. 8. Definitely 8 places set around that table. "Who else is coming?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Ashley's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "Well, my parents flew in from California yesterday, and my sister Julie decided to drive up from Phoenix with her family, but that's different, Hannah. They don't get to see the kids very often, living so far away. Different. The word echoed in my head as I stood there, still holding the pie I'd made with such care. My grandchildren, whom I'd babysat every weekend for the past 3 years, while Ashley and David had their date nights. The same children I'd picked up from school countless times when work emergencies came up. The ones I'd helped with homework, taken to doctor's appointments when David was traveling, read bedtime stories to until they fell asleep in my lap. Apparently, seeing them weekly made my presence less valuable than relatives who visited twice a year. "I see," I managed to say. "And David agreed to this?" Ashley's smile returned, bright and cold as winter sunshine. "David wants what's best for his family, Hannah. I'm sure you understand that. Family dynamics can be complicated, and sometimes we need to make difficult decisions. Maybe next year we can work something out. Next year." As if this year was just an unfortunate scheduling conflict, rather than a deliberate exclusion. I stood there for another long moment, listening to Emma's distinctive giggle echoing from somewhere inside the house. I could smell the turkey roasting, the sage stuffing that Ashley always made from a recipe she'd found in some gourmet magazine. The house was filled with warmth and celebration and family, everything I'd been looking forward to sharing. "Of course," I said finally, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "I wouldn't want to intrude on your family time." Ashley's relief was visible. "I knew you'd understand. You're always so reasonable about these things." As I walked back to my car, the pie carrier feeling heavier with each step, I heard the front door close behind me. Not slammed, just closed with a soft, final click. I sat in my driver's seat for several minutes, staring at the house where my son lived, where my grandchildren were learning that Grandma Hannah wasn't important enough to be included in family celebrations. My phone buzzed, a text from David. "Sorry, Mom. Ashley said you weren't feeling well today. Hope you feel better soon. We'll bring you leftovers tomorrow." I stared at the screen, reading the message twice. Ashley had already constructed the narrative that would explain my absence to everyone else. Poor Hannah, under the weather again. How convenient for all involved. No one would question why I wasn't there, because Ashley had provided a perfectly reasonable explanation. The drive home felt longer than usual. I placed the untouched pie on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a while. All that work, all that care, for nothing. I opened a can of soup and sat down at my small dining table, set for one, eating my Thanksgiving dinner in silence. As I sat there, I thought about the automatic bank transfers that left my account every month like clockwork. 15 years of transfers that Ashley believed came from David's business account. The mortgage payment on their beautiful house, the lease payments on their 2 cars, the tuition for Emma and Jake's private school, the family health insurance premiums, all of it, quietly funded by the woman who apparently wasn't real family. Ashley wanted to talk about real family? Tomorrow, I decided, she would learn exactly what real family meant, and what happened when you threw it away. Friday morning came too early. I'd barely slept, replaying every moment of yesterday's humiliation over and over in my mind. The way Ashley had looked at me like I was an inconvenience, the casual cruelty of her words, the sound of my grandchildren's laughter that I wasn't allowed to share. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at the bank statement spread across the surface. 15 years of automatic transfers, each one documented in neat rows of numbers that told a story Ashley had never bothered to investigate. The first transfer had started in 2008, right after David bought the house. He'd called me, excited, but worried about the mortgage payments. "It's a stretch, Mom, but Ashley loves it, and we think it's a good investment." What he didn't know was that I'd called the bank the next day and set up an automatic transfer to cover half his mortgage payment every month. I told myself it was temporary, just until his business got more established. But temporary had stretched into permanent, and half had gradually become the full amount as I watched my son and daughter-in-law live beyond their means, while somehow always managing to make ends meet. They thought David's business was more successful than it actually was. They had no idea that Grandma Hannah was the reason they could afford their lifestyle. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my online banking. The numbers were stark and undeniable. Mortgage payment, $2,847 monthly. Car payments for both vehicles, $1,356 combined. Private school tuition for Emma and Jake, $2,400 per month. Health insurance premiums, $890. Even their cell phone family plan, $245. All of it automatically deducted from my account on the first of every month for the past 15 years. I opened a calculator and started adding. The total made my hands shake. Over $120,000 per year, nearly $2 million over the course of their marriage. Money that had come from my late husband's life insurance policy, his pension, and the sale of our family home after he passed. The most painful part wasn't the money itself. It was that I'd done it gladly, quietly, wanting to help my son succeed without bruising his pride. I'd never asked for thanks or recognition. I'd just wanted to be part of their lives, to watch my grandchildren grow up, to feel needed and valued. Yesterday had shown me exactly how valued I was. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" His voice carried that careful, solicitous tone people use when they're talking to someone they think is fragile. "I'm fine, David. Just tired. Ashley feels terrible about yesterday. She said you seemed disappointed about not feeling well enough to join us. We saved you a plate. I could bring it over later if you want." I closed my eyes. Even now, Ashley's lie was holding. Even my own son believed I'd been sick rather than deliberately excluded. "That's very thoughtful, but I'm not really hungry." "Are you sure you're okay? You sound different." Different. If only he knew how different everything was about to become. "David, can I ask you something? How do you manage all the monthly expenses? The mortgage, the cars, the kids' school? Your business must be doing incredibly well." There was a pause. "Well, it's tight sometimes, but we make it work. Ashley's really good at budgeting, and I've been getting some bigger contracts lately." "Why do you ask?" "Ashley's good at budgeting." I almost laughed. She was good at spending money she didn't know wasn't theirs. "I was just curious. You have such a nice lifestyle, and I know those private schools are expensive." "They are, but we think it's worth it for Emma and Jake's future. Speaking of which, I should probably get going. I promised Ashley I'd help clean up from yesterday. You sure you don't want those leftovers?" "I'm sure. Give my love to the children." After he hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. My son had no idea. Absolutely no idea where his comfortable life actually came from. He believed his own narrative about successful contracting work and Ashley's budgeting skills. The truth would destroy him. But the truth was exactly what he needed to hear. I opened my laptop again and navigated to the bank's website. One by one, I began canceling the automatic transfers. Mortgage payment? Canceled. Car payments? Canceled. School tuition? Canceled. Health insurance? Canceled. Even the small ones like their Netflix subscription and Ashley's monthly massage membership. Each cancellation required confirmation. "Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring payment?" the website asked. I clicked yes 15 times, watching years of financial support disappear with each mouse click. The last transfer I canceled was the one that hurt the most. The $200 monthly deposit I'd been making to Emma and Jake's college savings accounts. Money I'd been setting aside for their futures. Money they'd never even known existed. When I finished, I felt hollow inside. Not regretful exactly, but empty. Like I'd just severed the last thread connecting me to my son's family. My phone rang again. This time it was my sister Margaret calling from Arizona. "How was Thanksgiving?" she asked cheerfully. "Did Ashley make that cranberry sauce recipe I gave her last year?" I found myself crying before I could answer. The whole story poured out. Ashley's rejection, David's obliviousness, the years of secret financial support, and what I'd just done. Margaret listened without interrupting, making the occasional sympathetic sound. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Hannah," she said finally, "you did the right thing." "Did I?" "I just cut off my son's entire financial support system. His mortgage payment alone is almost $3,000. He has no idea how he's going to pay it. He's a grown man with his own business. He'll figure it out. And if he doesn't, that's his problem, not yours. You've been enabling them for 15 years, honey. They've been living a lie funded by your generosity, and they've repaid you by treating you like garbage. But the children will be fine. Maybe they'll have to change schools. Maybe Ashley will have to get a job. Maybe they'll have to downsize the house. None of that will kill them. It might even teach them some valuable lessons about gratitude and family." After I hung up with Margaret, I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where I kept my important papers. In a file folder labeled Financial Records, I had copies of every transfer, every payment, every penny I'd spent supporting David's family over the years. I'd kept meticulous records, partly out of habit and partly because some small part of me had always known this day might come. The day when I'd need proof of what I'd sacrificed for people who didn't value my sacrifice. Tomorrow was Saturday. In my old life, that would have meant babysitting Emma and Jake, while David and Ashley went out for their weekly date night. I wondered if Ashley would call to confirm, or if she'd just assume I was available as always. I decided I wouldn't be available. Not anymore. I made myself a simple dinner and went to bed early, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about what would happen when David's first payment got rejected. When Ashley tried to take the kids to their expensive activities and found out their accounts were overdrawn. When they realized their comfortable life had been built on a foundation that was no longer there. Part of me felt guilty for the chaos I was about to unleash, but a bigger part of me felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of control over my own life. Ashley had wanted to define who counted as real family. Now she was going to learn what happened when you excluded the person who'd been holding your family together all along. The automated cancellations would take effect on December 1st. In just 6 days, their world would start to crumble, and they'd have no idea why. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I smiled. It was a cold February morning when my phone started ringing at 7:30. David's name flashed on the screen for the third time in 5 minutes. I was sitting in my favorite chair by the window, watching the snow fall while sipping my morning tea. I'd been expecting this call for weeks. I let it go to voicemail. The past 3 months had been the most peaceful I'd experienced in years. Without the constant worry about David and Ashley's financial needs, without the weekend babysitting duties I was apparently no longer welcome for, I'd rediscovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I'd joined a book club at the local library, started taking watercolor classes at the community center, even made friends with my neighbor Ruth, who was also a widow and appreciated having someone to share morning coffee with. For the first time in 15 years, my weekends belonged to me, but I knew the peace wouldn't last forever. The automatic payment cancellations had taken effect on December 1st, just as planned. By now, David and Ashley would be drowning in financial confusion, and from the increasingly frantic voicemails David had been leaving, they were finally starting to panic. I picked up my phone and listened to his latest message. "Mom, please call me back. Something's wrong with our bank accounts. The mortgage payment bounced last month, and now they're saying January's payment was rejected too. Ashley's freaking out, and I don't understand what's happening. The bank says there's been some kind of error with our automatic transfers. Please, I really need to talk to you." I deleted the message and scrolled through the others I'd been ignoring. 23 voicemails over the past 2 weeks, each one more desperate than the last. David's voice had gone from confused to worried to genuinely frightened. According to the messages, their problems had started small. A declined payment here, an overdraft fee there, things that could be explained away as bank errors or computer glitches. But as more and more payments failed, the reality of their situation had become impossible to ignore. Their mortgage was now 3 months behind. Both car payments had lapsed, and Ashley's BMW had been repossessed 2 weeks ago. The children's private school had sent multiple notices about unpaid tuition. Their health insurance had been canceled for non-payment, which they'd discovered when Emma needed urgent care for strep throat and were asked to pay cash up front. I knew all of this not from David's messages, but from my careful observation of their neighborhood. I'd driven by their house several times over the past month, noting the certified mail accumulating in their mailbox, the missing BMW from their driveway, and the worried conversations I'd witnessed between Ashley and her neighbor across the street. It gave me no joy to watch their world crumble, but it gave me something that felt almost as valuable: vindication. My phone rang again. This time I answered. "Hi, David." "Mom, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Did you get my messages?" "I got them. I've been busy." "Busy? Mom, we're in crisis here. Something's happened to our accounts and I can't figure out what." The bank says all our automatic payments were canceled, but we never canceled them. Ashley thinks someone might have hacked our accounts or committed identity theft. Identity theft. That was Ashley's explanation for their sudden financial collapse. Of course, she couldn't imagine that David's business might not actually be as successful as they'd pretended. That sounds terrible, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Have you contacted the police? We filed a report, but they say there's no evidence of external fraud. Everything was canceled from our own accounts using proper authorization codes. It doesn't make sense. Maybe you should talk to your bank more thoroughly. Sometimes these things have simple explanations. We've been to the bank 6 times, Mom. They keep saying the same thing. The transfers were canceled by the account holder, but we didn't cancel anything. Ashley's convinced someone has been stealing from us for months, maybe years. Someone has been, I thought, just not in the way Ashley imagined. David, can I ask you something? How exactly did you think you were paying for everything? The mortgage, the cars, the kids' school? There was a long pause. What do you mean? From my business accounts, obviously. I've been working hard, getting good contracts. Your business brings in about $60,000 a year, David. Your mortgage alone is $34,000 annually. How did you think the math worked? Another pause. Longer this time. Ashley handles all the finances. She said we were managing fine, that her budgeting was keeping us afloat. She showed me spreadsheets and everything. Ashley's spreadsheets. I wondered what creative accounting she'd use to make their impossible budget seem reasonable. Probably assumed David's business was more profitable than it actually was, and never questioned where the extra money came from. David, I need to tell you something. Can you sit down? What? Mom? What's going on? You're scaring me. I took a deep breath. For the past 15 years, I've been paying your mortgage, and your car payments, and the kids' school tuition, and your health insurance, and about 20 other monthly expenses. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. What? His voice was barely a whisper. Every month since you bought that house, I've been transferring money from my account to cover your bills. You thought it was coming from your business, but it wasn't. It was coming from me. That's impossible. Ashley manages our finances. She would have noticed. Would she? Have you ever actually looked at the bank statements? Really looked at them? Or did you just trust Ashley when she said everything was fine? I heard him breathing heavily. Why would you? Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed to feel successful. Because I wanted to help without damaging your pride. Because I loved watching you and Ashley and the kids live comfortably, and I was happy to make that possible. But the payments stopped. In December. Why did they stop? My chest tightened. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. They stopped because Ashley made it very clear on Thanksgiving that I'm not real family. She excluded me from your dinner, lied to you about why I wasn't there, and made me understand that my presence in your lives is unwelcome. Thanksgiving? But you were sick. Ashley said you called and said you weren't feeling well. David, I was never sick. I came to your house with a homemade pie, and Ashley told me there was no seat for me, because the dinner was just for real family. She sent me away while her parents and sister enjoyed the meal I was supposed to share with my grandchildren. The silence this time was different. I could practically hear him thinking, remembering, trying to reconcile Ashley's story with what I was telling him. She said you were sick. I wasn't sick. I was heartbroken, and I decided that if I'm not real family, then maybe real family should learn to support themselves. Mom? His voice cracked. How much money are we talking about? I'd prepared for this question. About $120,000 a year, nearly $2 million over the course of your marriage. The sound he made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. $2 million? I kept records, David. Every payment, every transfer, every penny. I can show you the documentation if you need proof. I can't process this. You've been supporting us this whole time and I had no idea. How could I not know? Because you trusted Ashley to handle the finances, and Ashley never questioned where the money came from. She was too busy spending it. Oh God, the mortgage, the cars, Emma and Jake's school. How are we going to? I don't know, David. That's not my problem anymore. The harshness of my own words surprised me, but they felt right, necessary. Mom, please. I had no idea Ashley said those things to you. If I'd known, I would have said something. I would have made her apologize. Would you have? Or would you have made excuses for her like you always do? He was crying now. I could hear it in his voice. We're going to lose everything. The house, the cars, the kids will have to change schools. Ashley's already talking about taking them and moving in with her parents in California, running away. Of course, that would be Ashley's solution. Maybe that's what needs to happen, I said quietly. Maybe you all need to learn what real life costs without someone else paying your bills. Can we? Is there any way to fix this? Any way to restart the payments? I'll make Ashley apologize. I'll make sure she understands. David, you can't make someone understand respect. Either they have it or they don't. Ashley made her feelings about me perfectly clear. But what about Emma and Jake? They don't deserve to suffer because of Ashley's mistakes. That hit home harder than I wanted to admit. The children will be fine. Maybe they'll learn something valuable about gratitude and family loyalty. Maybe they'll understand that actions have consequences. Mom, please, I'm begging you. I'll do anything. For a moment, I wavered. The desperation in my son's voice was breaking my heart. But then I remembered Thanksgiving, the casual cruelty of Ashley's dismissal. The way my own grandchildren had been taught that Grandma Hannah wasn't important enough to include. I'll think about it, I said finally, but things can never go back to the way they were. If there's any hope of rebuilding our relationship, Ashley needs to take responsibility for what she did. Real responsibility, not just empty apologies. I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand. No, David, she needs to talk to me herself, and she needs to mean it. After I hung up, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the snow continue to fall. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. For 15 years, I'd been invisible in my own family's life. Now, suddenly, I was the most important person in their world. The question was, what was I going to do with that power? The foreclosure notice arrived on a Tuesday in early March. I knew because Ruth had mentioned seeing the official-looking envelope taped to David's front door when she drove past their neighborhood on her way to her daughter's house. By Thursday, it was gone, which meant they'd finally been forced to face the reality I'd been watching unfold from a distance. I was arranging flowers from my small garden when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number, but when I answered, it was Ashley's voice that greeted me. Hannah? Her voice was different, smaller. The confident, condescending tone I'd grown accustomed to over the years had been replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. Could we talk? I set down my pruning shears and sat on my porch steps. Of course, Ashley. What would you like to talk about? David told me about the payments, about what you've been doing all these years. What I've been doing? The financial support. I had no idea. David says you've been covering our mortgage and expenses for 15 years. I let the silence stretch between us. She'd called me. She could do the work of this conversation. I want to apologize, she continued, her words coming in a rush. About Thanksgiving. I was stressed about hosting everyone, and I handled things badly. I should have included you, your family, and I was wrong to suggest otherwise. The apology sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror. There was no real acknowledgement of the cruelty involved. No understanding of how deeply she'd hurt me, just damage control. You told me there was no seat for me because it was just for real family, Ashley. Those were your exact words. I know, and I regret that. I was overwhelmed with cooking and coordinating everything. I wasn't thinking clearly. Still making excuses, still refusing to take real responsibility. How are Emma and Jake handling everything? I asked, changing the subject. Her voice cracked slightly. They're confused. We had to pull them out of St. Michael's Academy last month. They're in public school now, which is fine, but it's been an adjustment. Emma keeps asking why we had to leave their old school, why Daddy seems so worried all the time. I felt a pang of sympathy for my grandchildren, caught in the middle of adult problems they couldn't understand, but I pushed the feeling aside. Ashley had created this situation with her cruelty and her assumptions. And David? How is he handling the stress? He's struggling. He's been taking on extra work, trying to increase his income. But it's not enough to cover everything we've fallen behind on. The mortgage company has started foreclosure proceedings. We have 60 days to either catch up on payments or find somewhere else to live. 60 days, 2 months to either humble herself completely or lose everything. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, meaning it despite everything. That must be very frightening. Hannah, I need to ask you something, and I know I have no right to ask, but is there any way you could consider resuming the payments? Just temporarily, until we can figure out a different solution? There it was. The real reason for her call. Not genuine remorse for how she'd treated me. Not a sincere apology for years of condescension and exclusion. Just desperate self-interest dressed up as reconciliation. Ashley, do you understand what you did to me on Thanksgiving? I hurt your feelings, and I'm sorry, I really am. You didn't hurt my feelings. You excluded me from my own family. You made my grandchildren watch as their grandmother was turned away from their home. You lied to my son about why I wasn't there, making him believe I was sick rather than unwelcome. I know it was wrong. Do you? Because even now you're calling it handling things badly and blaming stress. You're not taking responsibility for a deliberate act of cruelty. The phone was quiet for a moment. When Ashley spoke again, her voice was tight. What do you want me to say, Hannah? That I'm a terrible person? That I've ruined everything? Because believe me, I'm already aware of how dire our situation is. I want you to understand that when you treated me like I didn't matter, you were cutting off the hand that was feeding you. I want you to acknowledge that every month for 15 years, while you were looking down on me, judging my clothes and my modest lifestyle, I was the reason you could afford yours. I understand that now. Do you? Because I don't think you do. I think you understand that you need my money, but I don't think you understand that you broke something that can't be easily fixed. I heard her take a shaky breath. David says the total amount is almost $2 million over the years. I can't comprehend that number. Why would you do that without telling us? Because I loved my son and wanted to help him succeed. Because I loved my grandchildren and wanted them to have opportunities. Because I thought I was part of a family that valued love over status. We do value. Ashley, you judged me for 15 years. Every family gathering, every conversation, every interaction was colored by your assumption that I was some kind of charity case. You tolerated me because you thought David felt obligated to include his poor mother. You had no idea that your entire lifestyle was charity. My charity. The silence stretched longer this time. When she spoke again, she sounded like she was crying. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what you want from me. I want honesty. I want you to admit that you were cruel, not just stressed. I want you to acknowledge that you spent years treating me like I was beneath you while I was literally supporting your family. And I want you to understand that respect isn't something you can just turn on when you need something. I respect you. You respect my money. There's a difference. That's not fair, isn't it? Tell me, Ashley, in 15 years of marriage to my son, how many times did you ask about my interests, my hobbies, my life? How many times did you invite me to do something with you that didn't involve babysitting your children? How many times did you treat me like a person rather than an obligation? The silence was answer enough. Hannah, please, she said finally, her voice breaking. We're going to lose our home. The children don't understand what's happening. David is barely sleeping, barely eating. He's taking any work he can find, but it's not enough. I know I've made mistakes, but punishing Emma and Jake for my failures doesn't seem right. She was right about that, and she knew it. Using my grandchildren as emotional leverage was her last card to play. You're right, I said quietly. The children don't deserve to suffer for your mistakes. But Ashley, those children watched their grandmother get turned away from their home on Thanksgiving. What lesson did that teach them about family loyalty? I'll tell them the truth. I'll explain that it was my fault, that I made a terrible mistake. Will you? Or will you craft some story that makes you look better, the way you did with David about my supposed illness? I'll tell them the truth, she repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. Here's what's going to happen, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. I'm going to think about whether there's any path forward. But if there is, it's going to require changes, real changes, not just apologies, but actions that demonstrate respect. What kind of changes? That's not for you to negotiate, Ashley. That's for me to decide. If I choose to help, and that's a very big if, it will be on my terms, with my conditions. Okay, yes, whatever you think is fair. Don't agree so quickly. You don't know what I might require. I don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. That was the first completely honest thing she'd said during the entire conversation. "I'll call you in a few days with my decision," I said. "In the meantime, I suggest you spend some time thinking about what family actually means. Not just when you need something, but all the time." After I hung up, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across my small garden. Ruth came over with a cup of tea and sat beside me without saying anything. She'd become a good friend over these past months, someone who understood the complexity of family relationships and the pain of feeling invisible in your own life. "Rough conversation?" she asked eventually. "My daughter-in-law finally called to apologize. Sort of. She's sorry she got caught. Sorry her comfortable life is falling apart. I'm not sure she's actually sorry for how she treated me." Ruth nodded. "What are you going to do?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. Part of me wanted to let them lose everything, to watch Ashley learn what real consequences looked like. But another part of me couldn't bear the thought of Emma and Jake losing their home, changing schools again, watching their parents' marriage crumble under financial stress. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but if I do help them, it's going to be very different this time. No more secret payments, no more invisible support. If I'm going to be part of this family, I'm going to be treated like it." "And if Ashley can't handle that?" I looked at my small, comfortable home, thought about my watercolor classes and book club, my peaceful mornings and quiet evenings. I'd built a good life for myself these past months, a life where I mattered. "Then she'll learn that some mistakes cost more than money," I said. "They cost everything." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing down exactly what I would require if I decided to save David and Ashley's marriage, their home, their lifestyle. The list was longer than I'd expected, and far more demanding than Ashley could possibly imagine. But if she wanted my money back, she was going to have to earn it. And more importantly, she was going to have to earn me. 3 days after Ashley's desperate phone call, I made my decision. I folded the legal pad with my carefully written conditions and drove to David's house for the first time since Thanksgiving. The foreclosure notice was gone from the door, but the stress was visible everywhere else. The once pristine lawn was overgrown, Ashley's flower beds were choked with weeds, and there was an air of barely controlled desperation about the whole property. I rang the doorbell and waited. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement, heard whispered voices conferring quickly before the door opened. David stood there looking like he'd aged 5 years in 6 months. His hair was unkempt. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. Behind him, Ashley appeared in the hallway, her perfect composure replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who hadn't been sleeping. "Mom," David said, his voice a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "We need to talk," I said simply. "All 3 of us." They led me to the living room where I'd once been a regular guest. The expensive furniture was still there, but everything felt different now. The room had the tense atmosphere of a family in crisis, the kind of brittle energy that comes when people are holding their breath, waiting for their world to collapse completely. I sat in the chair I'd always preferred, the one by the window where I could see the backyard where Emma and Jake used to play. Ashley and David took the couch across from me, sitting close together like they were facing a tribunal. "I've thought about our conversation, Ashley," I began, pulling out my folded paper, "and I've decided I'm willing to consider resuming financial support, but not the way it was before." Relief flooded both their faces, but I held up my hand. "There will be conditions, non-negotiable conditions, and if either of you violates any of them, the support stops immediately and permanently." David leaned forward. "What kind of conditions?" I unfolded my list and looked at them both seriously. "First, there will be no more secret payments. Every month, I'll write a check for the mortgage and essential expenses, and I'll hand it to you personally. You'll both acknowledge where the money comes from, and you'll both express gratitude." Ashley's face flushed, but she nodded. "Second, I will be included in all family gatherings. Not invited, not accommodated, included. As an equal member of this family, that means holidays, birthdays, school events, everything." "Of course," David said quickly, "that should have always been the case." "Third," I continued, looking directly at Ashley, "you will publicly acknowledge to your parents, your sister, and anyone else who was at that Thanksgiving dinner that you lied about me being sick. You will tell them the truth about what you said to me and apologize for it in front of them." Ashley's color drained. "Hannah, that's very embarrassing. Not as embarrassing as being told you're not real family in front of your grandchildren." She looked down at her hands. "Okay, I'll do it. Fourth, I want to spend individual time with Emma and Jake every week, not babysitting while you two go out. Quality time where I'm the priority, not the convenience." "Absolutely," David said. "The kids have missed you so much." "Fifth," I said, my voice getting harder, "Ashley will get a job, a real job, 40 hours a week minimum. This family is going to learn what it means to work for their lifestyle instead of taking it for granted." Ashley's head snapped up. "A job? But the children need to see their mother contributing to the household instead of just spending money she didn't earn. They need to learn that comfortable lifestyles require effort and sacrifice." "What kind of job?" she asked weakly. "I don't care. Retail, office work, food service, something that teaches you humility and shows you what real work looks like." The room was quiet except for the sound of Ashley's increasingly rapid breathing. "Sixth," I continued, "you will attend family counseling, all of us. We're going to address the dynamic that allowed this situation to develop in the first place." David nodded. "That makes sense. We obviously have communication issues." "And finally," I said, looking directly into Ashley's eyes, "you will write a letter to Emma and Jake explaining why their grandmother was excluded from Thanksgiving. You will tell them the truth about your behavior and apologize to them for depriving them of time with their grandmother. You want me to tell the children that I was wrong?" Ashley's voice was barely a whisper. "I want you to teach them that adults make mistakes and have to take responsibility for them. I want them to understand that family members don't exclude each other out of spite or superiority." Ashley was crying now, quiet tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. "This is going to destroy how they see me." "Maybe it should," I said without sympathy. "Maybe they should see that their mother isn't perfect, that she's capable of cruelty, and that she has to work to earn forgiveness just like everyone else." David reached over and took Ashley's hand. "Honey, these conditions seem fair. Mom has been incredibly generous, and we haven't always appreciated it." "Fair?" Ashley looked at him incredulously. "She wants me to humiliate myself in front of everyone. She wants me to get some minimum wage job and confess my failures to my own children." "You humiliated her," David said quietly, "in front of her grandchildren. And as for getting a job, Mom's right. We've been living beyond our means for years without realizing it. It's time we both contributed to our financial security." I watched this exchange with interest. David was finally seeing his wife clearly, understanding the entitlement and selfishness that had driven her behavior. The financial crisis had stripped away the illusions that had sustained their marriage. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out a second piece of paper. "I've had my lawyer draw up a formal agreement. If you accept my conditions, you'll both sign this document acknowledging that any financial support I provide is conditional on your compliance with these terms." Ashley stared at the legal document like it was a snake. "You're making us sign a contract? I'm protecting myself from future manipulation. If you violate any of these conditions, I want legal documentation that the support ends immediately." "What happens if we don't sign?" she asked. "Then you lose your house in 37 days, David declares bankruptcy, and you probably end up divorced within a year when the financial stress destroys your marriage." The brutal honesty of my words hung in the air like smoke. Ashley looked at David, searching his face for some sign that he would choose her pride over their survival. But David was looking at the foreclosure timeline, the stack of overdue bills on their coffee table, the reality of their situation. "I'll sign it," he said firmly. "Mom, you're being more than generous. These conditions are reasonable given what we've put you through." Ashley sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the legal document. I could practically see her weighing her options, calculating whether her pride was worth more than her comfortable lifestyle. "The job requirement," she said finally. "Can I at least look for something professional? Something that uses my education? You can look for whatever you want, as long as it's 40 hours a week and provides a real paycheck. But Ashley, if you spend months looking for the perfect position while expecting me to support you, The deal is off. She nodded reluctantly. How long do I have to find something? 2 weeks. If you don't have a job in 2 weeks, I'll find one for you. The threat was implicit but clear. I would not hesitate to see her working at a grocery store or restaurant if she couldn't swallow her pride enough to find employment on her own. And the letter to the children, she said, her voice barely audible. When do you want that? This weekend. I want to read it before you give it to them, and I want to be there when you read it to them. You want to watch me confess to my children that I'm a bad mother? I want to watch you teach your children about accountability and family loyalty, something they apparently haven't learned yet. David squeezed Ashley's hand. Honey, we can do this. It's not forever, just until we get back on our feet. But I knew better. This wasn't temporary. This was a fundamental shift in the power dynamic of our family. Ashley would never again be able to look down on me, because she would always know that her lifestyle depended on my generosity. She would never again be able to exclude me, because she would understand the consequences. Do we have an agreement? I asked. David signed first, his signature firm and decisive. Ashley hesitated for a long moment, the pen trembling in her hand. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from her soul, she signed her name below his. Good, I said, taking the document and folding it carefully. I'll have the first mortgage payment ready on Monday. Ashley, I expect to hear about your job search by Wednesday. As I walked to the door, I heard Ashley crying behind me, not the manipulative tears she'd used during our phone conversation, but the deep, ugly sobs of someone whose world had just completely changed. At the door, David caught my arm. Mom, thank you. I know this isn't easy for you either. No, I agreed. It's not. But maybe now we can build something real instead of living a lie. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for a return to the old dynamic where I was invisible and unappreciated, but for something new. Something where my value was acknowledged, where my place in the family was secure, where my grandchildren would learn what it meant to respect the people who loved them. Ashley would hate every minute of the new arrangement, but she would comply, because the alternative was losing everything. And for the first time in 15 years, that choice was entirely mine to make. The Thanksgiving table was set for 10 this year. Real china, real silverware, and a centerpiece of autumn flowers that Emma had helped me arrange that morning. But the most important difference was my place at the head of the table, where the matriarch belonged. I stood in David's kitchen, watching Ashley put the finishing touches on the meal she'd spent all day preparing. It was strange to see her moving around this kitchen with the careful deference she now showed me, asking permission before making decisions, checking to make sure everything met my approval. The turkey looks perfect, I told her, and watched her shoulders relax slightly at the praise. Thank you. I used the recipe you gave me last month, the recipe I'd been trying to share with her for 15 years, which she'd always dismissed as too old-fashioned for her sophisticated palate. Funny how financial desperation had suddenly made my grandmother's cooking wisdom seem valuable. Grandma Hannah! Jake burst into the kitchen, wearing the dress shirt and tie I'd bought him for school pictures. Mom said I could help you carry things to the table. That would be wonderful, sweetheart. I handed him the bowl of mashed potatoes, noting how he automatically gave me a hug before taking it. These small gestures of affection had returned gradually over the past year, as the children learned that their grandmother was someone to be valued rather than ignored. Emma appeared in the doorway, looking lovely in the dress David had finally been able to afford, after Ashley's job at the insurance office started contributing to their income. Grandma, Dad wants to know if you're ready for everyone to sit down. Everyone. Ashley's parents had flown in from California, the same ones who'd enjoyed that exclusive Thanksgiving dinner last year, while I sat alone in my apartment. They'd been notably subdued during yesterday's family gathering, still processing Ashley's public apology from 2 weeks ago. The awkwardness was palpable, but necessary. Tell him we're ready, I said, smoothing Emma's hair. You look beautiful, honey. As we gathered around the table, I took my place at the head with a satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with rightful recognition. David sat to my right, Ashley to my left. The children scattered around the sides with Ashley's family filling out the rest of the seats. Before we eat, David said, standing with his wine glass, I want to make a toast. He looked around the table, his gaze settling on me with an expression of genuine gratitude I'd never seen before this year. To my mother, who taught our family what real generosity looks like and what real family means. Everyone raised their glasses, including Ashley, though I could see the effort it cost her. The public acknowledgement of my role in their family was still difficult for her, even after months of practice. And, David continued, to my wife, who has shown incredible strength this year in making the changes our family needed. Ashley's smile was more genuine this time. The year had been hard on her, but it had also taught her things about herself she'd never been forced to confront. The job at Meridian Insurance had been humbling at first. She'd started as a receptionist, the only position she could find within my 2-week deadline, but she'd proven competent and hardworking, earning 2 promotions and a measure of respect from her colleagues. More importantly, it had given her something she'd never had before: independence, her own paycheck, her own professional identity, her own sense of accomplishment that didn't depend on spending other people's money. To family, I said, raising my own glass. All of us. As we began eating, the conversation flowed more naturally than it had in years. Ashley's father, who'd barely acknowledged my existence at previous gatherings, asked about my watercolor classes. Her mother complimented the flowers Emma and I had arranged, actually engaging with me as a person, rather than an obligatory presence. The shift hadn't happened overnight. The first few months after the agreement had been tense and awkward, with Ashley fulfilling the letter of our contract while clearly resenting every moment. But gradually, something had changed. Maybe it was the weekly family counseling sessions, where we'd all learn to communicate more honestly. Maybe it was watching her children's relationship with me flourish when she stopped interfering. Or maybe it was simply the relief of having financial security coupled with the self-respect that came from earning her own way. "Grandma Hannah," Emma said during dessert, "will you tell us the story about the princess who saved herself?" It was our tradition, the one Ashley had interrupted so rudely 2 years ago. But now, instead of discouraging the children's attention to me, Ashley simply smiled and cleared dishes quietly while I launched into the familiar tale. As I told the story, I caught sight of Ashley listening from the kitchen doorway, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Later, I found out she'd been secretly practicing my recipes and trying to learn the stories I told the children, wanting to understand what made these traditions so important to them. After dinner, as the family scattered to various activities, Ashley approached me in the living room where I was reading to Jake. "Hannah," she said quietly, "could I talk to you for a moment?" I finished the page and handed the book to Jake. "Go find your sister, sweetheart. I'll finish this story later." When we were alone, Ashley sat down across from me, her hands folded in her lap. The combative posture I'd grown accustomed to over the years had been replaced by something more humble, more genuine. "I want to thank you," she said, "for giving us another chance, for saving our family." "You saved your own family, Ashley. I just stopped enabling the behavior that was destroying it." She nodded, looking down at her hands. "The job, the counseling, all of it. I hated it at first. I felt like you were punishing me, trying to humiliate me. And now I understand that you were trying to teach me something I should have learned a long time ago, about respect, about earning things instead of just expecting them." She looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, genuine remorse mixed with something that might have been gratitude. "I was cruel to you on Thanksgiving 2 years ago, not just rude or thoughtless, but deliberately cruel. And I convinced myself it was justified because I thought you were less than us." The admission hung in the air between us. It was the first time she'd acknowledged the deliberate nature of her cruelty, rather than dismissing it as stress or miscommunication. "What changed your mind?" I asked, "watching Emma and Jake with you this year, seeing how much they love you, how much they've always loved you, realizing that I was teaching them that it was okay to dismiss people who didn't fit our image of success." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "They could have grown up to be like me, entitled and shallow and ungrateful. You saved them from that too." I felt something soften in my chest, a knot of resentment I'd been carrying for years finally beginning to loosen. "And David?" I asked. "David sees me clearly now, all of me, including the parts I'm not proud of. But somehow he still loves me, and he's helping me become someone better." She paused, then added, "Someone worthy of the family I married into." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the sounds of family around us. David and his father-in-law discussing baseball, Emma practicing piano in the next room, Jake building something with his grandfather on the floor. The agreement we signed, Ashley said eventually. I know it's supposed to be temporary, until we're back on our feet financially, but I don't want things to go back to the way they were before. I raised an eyebrow. You want to keep working? Keep the monthly acknowledgement of where the money comes from? I want to keep being honest about our relationship. I want to keep treating you like the important member of this family that you are. I want Emma and Jake to grow up understanding that their grandmother isn't just someone we tolerate, but someone we treasure. The words were simple, but I could hear the effort behind them. Ashley was still proud, still sometimes struggled with the humbling realities of our new dynamic, but she was trying, genuinely trying, to be better. What about when the mortgage is paid off? I asked. When you're truly financially independent? Then I want to keep having you in our lives because we want you here, not because we need you here. I want to earn your love instead of just expecting it. It was perhaps the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. Later that evening, after Ashley's parents had returned to their hotel and the children were in bed, I sat with David and Ashley in their living room, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the fire David had built in the fireplace. I have something to tell you both, I said, setting down my glass. I've been thinking about what happens next, about the long-term arrangement. They both tensed slightly, probably expecting me to announce new conditions or changes to our agreement. I've decided to change my will, I said simply. The house will go to both of you when I'm gone, along with most of my remaining assets. But there are conditions. David leaned forward. What kind of conditions? The inheritance is contingent on maintaining the family relationships we've built this year. If you ever exclude family members out of spite or superiority, if you ever treat people as less worthy based on their financial status, if you ever forget the lessons this year has taught us, the inheritance goes to charity. Ashley's eyes widened. You're leaving us your house? I'm leaving you the opportunity to deserve it, just like I gave you the opportunity to deserve my continued support this year. David reached over and took my hand. Mom, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Because this isn't just about money or houses or even about the past 2 years. It's about making sure Emma and Jake grow up in a family that values character over status, kindness over wealth, inclusion over exclusion. I looked at both of them seriously. They're watching us, learning from us. The family they create someday will be based on what they see in this house, around this table, in the way we treat each other when things are difficult. Ashley wiped tears from her eyes. We won't let you down. You already haven't, I said, squeezing David's hand and reaching for Ashley's with my other. This year, you both became the people I always hoped you could be. You became worthy of the love I always wanted to give freely. As I drove home that night to my small, comfortable apartment, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years ago, I'd been invisible in my own family, taken for granted and casually dismissed. The woman who'd enabled that invisibility was gone now, replaced by someone who knew her worth and insisted on being valued. Ashley would never again assume that her lifestyle was guaranteed. David would never again take his mother's love for granted. And Emma and Jake would grow up understanding that family was something you chose to honor every day, not something you could ignore until you needed it. The pain of that Thanksgiving exclusion had been real and deep, but it had also been the catalyst for becoming the person I was always meant to be. Someone who demanded respect rather than hoping for it. Someone who gave love but required it to be valued. Someone who understood that the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. Tomorrow I would call Margaret in Arizona and tell her about today, about Ashley's genuine apology, about David's clear-eyed gratitude, about Emma and Jake's unguarded affection, about the family dinner where I sat at the head of the table not as a guest, but as the acknowledged heart of the family. My sister would be proud of me, I thought. Proud that I'd found the courage to stop shrinking myself to accommodate other people's comfort. Proud that I'd used my pain as fuel for transformation rather than as an excuse for bitterness. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw the porch light I'd left on earlier, welcoming me home to the life I'd built for myself. A life where I mattered, where I was valued, where I was finally, truly free. The woman who'd been excluded from that Thanksgiving dinner was gone forever. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely more dangerous to anyone who tried to diminish her. Someone who would never again accept being called anything less than family.